So we're going to pick up with Canto 22. If you remember, um, at the end of Canto 21, Dante swoons. He essentially passes out or faints. At the end of that canto, Peter Damian um, rebukes degenerate priests and bishops and things like that. And when Canto 23 opens, 22 opens, Dante comes back to himself and he looks to Beatrice for aid and comfort. And, the little gloss at the top of page 249 tells us that she reassures him, etc. And St. Benedict, the founder of the Benedictines, comes and approaches Dante. And on page 250, he gives clues as to who he, the speaker, is by saying, line 37, he mentions casino and a spur of hill. He says, line 39, there I, the first, bore up the tidings of the word, which came on earth that truth might be revealed and power to rise above on man conferred. Okay? St. Benedict founded a monastery on Monte Cassino, Mount Cassino, in around the year 523, I think it was. Benedict was born in the year 480. Benedict is the father of Western monasticism. St. Anthony the Great of Egypt, late 2nd, early 3rd century, is the founder of monasticism generally. There weren't monks per se before him. He was the one who started monasticism, came up with the idea of a monastic rule that is an order of daily prayers and activities that one follows, things like that, okay? So, Dante asks at the bottom of page 250, speaking to St. Benedict, it says, Father, I pray thee, reassure thy son. Can I behold thee as thou truly art, with face uncovered? May such grace be won. Okay? He's asking, can I truly see you as you really are, not just as you are appearing to me in this sphere? And Benedict says, 251, thy yearning, brother, in the last sphere will be vouchsafed, even as mine own will be with those of every heart. That is, when you attain to the Empyrean, where God dwells, okay, he says, your yearning will be vouchsafed. That is, you will achieve what it is you desire. Now, here, he's speaking on multiple levels because he's addressing Dante's initial request. Can I see you as you are? Okay? But what it also means is every yearning of Dante's heart, okay, will be met, will be fulfilled. Okay? Just as Benedict says, my own will be. Because not everybody's desires are the same. Each individual, according to traditional Christian theology, whether of East or West, each individual is made in the image of God, but each individual's desire, that desire of the soul for God, is different, right? Because of their being distinct, individual, unique creatures. Okay? So that's why he goes on and says, line 64 and following, there and there only every longing has final attainment, perfect, ripe, and whole. And there each part is where it always was. For it is not in space and has no pole. Wherefore our ladder at its full extent steals from thy view, since yonder is its goal. That is, he's kind of saying to Dante, bear in mind, they are still in the heaven of Saturn, okay? And he's seen kind of the ladder of love that the souls appear on. And he's saying, you know, you can look up this ladder and you can see, you know, kind of metaphorically, where the two sides of the ladder disappear into infinity. The ladder just keeps reaching up, so to speak, until it reaches empyrean, where God dwells. And notice he says, there, where God is, every longing will reach its final attainment. And there, each part is where it always was. And I think, I'm not positive, I think what he means by that is kind of what Boethius suggested in The Consolation of Philosophy. There, with God, in the empyrean, is where each thing's home is, where it ultimately belongs, okay? Each thing, each created thing, ultimately has its home in God. Bear in mind, according to the diagram that you have on the fold-out thing at the end, you know, you've got Earth down here, surrounded by the moon, okay? And then Venus or Mercury, the sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, fixed stars, prima mobile, and then the empyrean. Okay, and each of these spheres is exactly that. So, you know, if my fist represents, or if this bottle top represents the Earth, then this is the moon around that, and then a larger sphere, and then a larger sphere. Notice each sphere contains the smaller one or ones within it. So when you reach the prima mobile, everything else is within, surrounded by the prima mobile. And then outside the prima mobile, the prime mover, the first mover, is the empyrean, which is where God, the language used is, which is where God dwells. But that's not quite accurate. It's which is where God is. Okay? Everything is within God, right? Has its ultimate source and being in God. And that's why he says, for it's not in space and has no pole. That is, it's you can't point to a direction. Okay? So he mentions Jacob because of the passage about Jacob's ladder in the Old Testament. And then line 73, no foot stirs now to reach the rungs, to crown iniquity there in my house. Men sit smirching with wasted ink my rules renown. And he's talking about back down there on earth. No foot stirs now to reach the rungs. He's saying nobody's trying to climb this ladder. I should mention, and I don't know that Dante knew this, it was known in the West. I just don't know that Dante knew. There was a book written by an Eastern monk named St. John of the Ladder, or St. John Climacus, written in the 7th century, I believe, titled The Ladder of Divine Ascent. And it's a book with 33 chapters, if you want, and each chapter represents a rung on the ladder of divine ascent. That is, the ascent to God-likeness, or the ascent to God. It became such an important book that an icon, a physical description of this ladder, was created after the book was written. And on it, you see people rising, and you see some people falling off and being pulled off by demons. And you see at the top of the ladder, coming out kind of like through a cloud, you know, is Christ, right? And yet people being received, and down beneath the ladder is this gaping, sometimes it's just a hole, usually it's a mouth to indicate, you know, hell personified. Here he's saying people don't even attempt to reach the rungs. They're not even attempting holiness. They're not even trying, in other words. And it's not just people, it's monks, Benedictine monks. Okay? Dens are the buildings, he says, once for abbots fit, okay? Leaders of monasteries, rancid the meal, and the cowls in which they dress are like so many sacks stuffed full with it. Notice he doesn't say what the it is, okay? But he's saying what they take into themselves is rancid. Gross usury bears lighter the impress of God's displeasure than the well-filled purse which monkish hearts now covet to excess. Well, remember where the usurers were in hell, right? He's also saying God isn't as displeased at usury as he is at monks who practice covetousness. Whatever wealth the church is called to nurse. Nurse. What do you do when you nurse something? You help it along. You restore it to health. Belongs to those who ask it in God's name. In other words, the church should have wealth for what purpose? To distribute to the poor. Okay? It's an idea that, isn't only in Dante, obviously, or in the New Testament. There are many Anglo-Saxon poems from Anglo-Saxon England that depict the purpose of gold is to be distributed, to be given away, right? Belongs to those who ask it in God's name, not to the families of monks, or worse. So monks shouldn't collect money, shouldn't earn money to give it to their families. And then he goes on and he mentions line 88, Peter, to found his house, no wealth desired. And your gloss tells you, could be St. Peter, okay, first bishop of Rome, could also be Peter Damian and the house he founded. Nor I, by fasting and by prayer made rich, I, St. Benedict, founder of the Benedictines, nor Francis, by humility inspired. If thou wouldst contemplate the point from which each one set out, and where their followers are, to each one, Peter Damian, St. Benedict, and St. Francis, they all started out from points of poverty. How? They gave away their wealth, as did St. Anthony, by the way. St. Anthony, the great founder of monasticism in Egypt, came from a wealthy family. He walked by a church one day and he heard from inside the church the text where Christ says, go and sell all that you have and come and follow me. He heard that, kind of bothered him. He found out what he meant, and he went and he sold all of his inheritance. His parents had died, he had it all. Sold all of his inheritance, left some aside for his sister, kind of like as a dowry for her, and then he went off into the desert. If thou wouldst contemplate the point from which each one set out, the founders of these monastic houses, and where their followers are, thou wilt perceive how white has changed to pitch. They started out in purity, and now they're dirty, they're foul. He's talking about the monastic houses. 106, page 252. Dante then says, reader, I tell thee. Notice how several times throughout all three books, Inferno, Purgatorio, Paradiso, Dante specifically addresses his reader. Why? What's he doing? What's he saying by calling out Ted Sherman? Well, he's reinforcing for us the purpose of this book, the whole Divine Comedy, is designed for what? For the improvement of the souls of its readers. This isn't just written merely to entertain you, to give you something to read on a cold winter evening or a nice spring day. It's not only to delight. The Roman poet Horace said the purpose of literature is twofold. It's to teach and to delight. Why? Because Horace said that if it doesn't have the delight aspect, it won't work on the teaching aspect. It'll be, Bible thumping, so to speak. Right? It'll be too didactic. So it's got to have got to have the interest to get somebody's, to whet their appetite, to make them want to read. So, line 106. Reader, I tell thee, as I hope to meet the triumph of God's holy ones again. And that's telling us that, this is written from the standpoint of Dante out of the journey, back in his study or library or wherever it is he's writing this. This is back in the body. And I hope to, what? Reascend. Whence weeping for my sins, my breast I beat. And if you remember, when he first went into the first cornice of purgatory, he left the anti-purgatory and he went in, and there was the angel of purgatory standing, sitting on the throne with the keys and such. And Dante beat his breast 3 times. And there was a footnote telling us, that's indicative of this Catholic practice, apparently in the Middle Ages, of, I have sinned, I have sinned, I have sinned, and beating, one's breast. So, weeping for my sins, my breast I beat, line 109, thrust thou thy finger in the flame, for pain thou'lt snatch it out. But not so fast as I saw and was in the heaven of the twain, that is Gemini, right? So, he says, put your finger in a flame and you'll pull it out really fast because it hurts. And he says, and as fast as you do that, I discovered what? He leaves the sphere of Jupiter and arises to the 8th heaven. O stars of glory, from whose light on high a mighty virtue poureth forth, to you I owe such genius as doth in me lie. Now the stars of glory, it's referring to the fixed stars of the 8th heaven, okay? From whose light on high as a mighty virtue poureth forth, to you I owe such genius as doth in me lie. Now, again, it's got twofold meaning. And I don't mean twofold as in the fourfold interpretation of the literal, the allegorical, the mystagogical, and the anagogical. I mean twofold in the sense of stars of glory. That's talking about from down here on earth, looking up to the stars, and how the stars pour forth virtue down here. But it's also Dante talking about rising up into the 8th sphere, the sphere of the fixed stars, and the virtue. Those stars trickle down, so to speak, on earth, but there's also a power above those. And we're going to read that later about how all these spheres get their powers from outside, from the Empyrean. So, from whose light on high a mighty virtue poureth forth. It's the light on high also that is God. Okay, God's light pours onto the 8th sphere, the fixed stars, and they transmit that virtue from God down beneath. With you there rose and sank again from view, he who is father of all life below, when my first breath in Tuscany I drew. Line 115, pretty sure he's referring to Virgil there. Dante was, he's talking about I was born under the sign of Gemini. between, etc., etc. Okay? Let's see here. So he goes on. Beatrice speaks, line 124. Before long thou wilt raise thine eyes, and the supreme good thou wilt see. Supreme good, that's God, right? Remember Plato's allegory of the cave and my very crude drawing, and you go out of the cave and you attempt to get to the highest good, the summum bonum. Okay, that's what she's referring to. Before long thou wilt raise thine eyes, that is, you will look up, and the supreme good thou wilt see. And there's probably an allusion there, you know, I will raise my eyes unto the hills from whence, you know, my deliverer cometh and such from the Old Testament. So the idea of raising the eyes, looking upwards. Hence thou must sharpen and make clear thy gaze. That is, from here to there, you've got to work on your eyesight, Dante. Before thou nearer to that presence be, cast thy look downward. That is, before we go up, look down. How vast a world I have set under thee, so that thy heart, taking its utmost share of joy, may greet the host which triumphing exultant comes through this ethereal sphere. So Dante, before he looks farther upwards, because notice, where you look is where you go. So if he looks upwards, that's the path he's following. But she tells him, look back. And part of that is so that he can see how far he's come, so to speak. So with my vision, line 133, I went traversing the 7 planets till this globe I saw, whereat I smiled, it seemed so poor a thing, the earth. Poor. There can mean small, it can mean without value, it can mean without merit. Highly I rate that judgment that doth low esteem the world. That is, who holds the world in low esteem, who doesn't think of the world that we inhabit as all that there is. What does Christ say? He who would save his life must lose it. And he says, better to lose your life than to lose your soul for the world. Him do I deem upright, whose thoughts are fixed on things of greater awe. That is, if you look around you and you think that the world around you is a beautiful, wonderful place, and there are many times when you have to look around at nature and go, wow, mind-blowing. Okay? Dante is saying, that's a mere foretaste. That's like a speck of the beauty and the glory and the wonder and such, okay, that exists out there. But this is just an image of. Use that Platonic language. This is an image. It's a shadow. It's a copy of that. And according to Dante's message, let's say, this is meant to draw you to that. That's why the girl, Beatrice, that he meets when she's 9 years old, and he's struck by love. It's not erotic love. It's not romantic love. It's divine love. He sees in her eyes, as it were, God, and she draws him upwards. Right? Okay, so let's go on. Canto 23. So he's risen to the 8th sphere, right? The 9th sphere is the primum mobile, the first mover. That's the first sphere that moves. and it moves the fastest, and it transmits its motion to the eighth, which transmits its motion to the seventh, et cetera, okay? So they're now looking upwards. They've stopped looking down below. They're looking upwards. And Dante sees heaven, so to speak, get brighter. And he starts to see these, George Bush's 1,000 points of light, so to speak. And we're told, line 19, as Dante looks, the light gets brighter and brighter. And Beatrice says, behold Christ's hosts in triumph. Thou mayst see the fruit all garnered here above, which neath these circling stars matured ere now. That is, he sees the lights, individual souls, of the church triumphant. There's in Christian terms, you've got the church militant and the church triumphant. The church militant are the members of the church, Christians, down here on earth. The church triumphant are the Christians who died and gone before. And just think of that language. Gone before means they've gone ahead. Both terms imply what? They're setting the trail. Follow the trail, okay? And Dante looks, and her face is aglow with love, her eyes, there's joyousness, etc., etc. And he gives us another simile. Notice how many similes. Every page has multiple similes. So as, etc. So line 28, page 258. Outshining myriad lamps, one sun I knew, which kindled all the rest. Even as our sun lights the celestial pageantry we view. Okay? One sun. This is his first vision of Christ. All right? And through the living radiance there shone the shining substance, the essence of the second person of the Trinity. Bright, and to such end, full in my face, my vision was undone. As he penetrates the light to see the essence of Christ's divinity, it's like he can't see anymore. O Beatrice, beloved guide, sweet friend, and she said that which now overmasters thee is might which nothing can evade or fend, that is, defend against. That is, she is suggesting everything, every created thing, from the highest angelic order to the lowest subatomic particle, will, let's say metaphorically, but she doesn't mean it metaphorically, will have to face that face, or that might, that power. St. Paul says, every knee must bow, everyone must acknowledge Christ and such. So nothing can evade, nothing can say, nope, I don't want to. Even in the lowest pit of hell, what? Christ is there. The very fact that they are enduring their punishment for all eternity indicates, the trueness of the power or the might, etc. Herein the wisdom and the power see that opened between heaven and earth the road long yearned for and awaited ardently. Long yearned for since Adam, and we're going to get a date and a computation later on, okay? How did it open the road between heaven and earth? The conception in Eve by the Holy Spirit of the second person of the Trinity, who was delivered 9 months later as a baby boy, who is both God and man. Elizabeth comes to Mary goes to Elizabeth's house 3 months, when she's 3 months pregnant. And Mary says, behold, excuse me, Elizabeth says, behold, how is it that the Lord of my Savior should come to me? And we're told the spirit of John the Baptist moved in her because Elizabeth was pregnant with John the Baptist at that time. Okay? And it's like John the Baptist acknowledges Christ in the womb, etc. Okay? So, line 46. Beatrice still speaking to Dante. Lift up thine eyes and look on me a while. See what I am. Thou hast beheld such things as make thee mighty to endure my smile. Okay? Well, kind of before, when he's looked and really gazed at her, he's overwhelmed by her. So now she's telling him, now you're better able to perceive. What did she tell him in the previous canto? You've got to work on your vision so that you can, when you arrive there, so that you can see God. So now she says, look at me. Notice, look at me for a while. See what I am. I am. Okay? Not see what I appear to be. Don't look at my accidents, my beautiful skin and such. She's saying, look at the real me, the soul within. I was as one that out of dreaming brings nothing to mind, though fruitlessly he cast about in search of hints and vanishings. Okay? This is Dante talking about what? The vision he had of Christ, just 15, 20 lines previously, that he couldn't, like, recall. Like, oh, it's right there. And he searches about. But when he hears her speak, and to the last, hears her offering herself, her sweet self-offering will never fade from the recorded pages of the past. He will always remember these words of her and this image of her. It's the vision he had of Christ that he's having trouble really recalling. He knows he had it, but he can't remember the imagery. Okay? 55. If all the tongues by muses nourished on sweetest milk of sacred poetry were now to sound in concert, lending aid, not to 1,000th in their chant would they the sacred beauty of her smile comprise, nor how it changed her holy aspect say. If all the sacred muses of song and poetry, etc., could be combined into one voice, he said, they wouldn't be able to get close to describe Beatrice's beauty. Line 61. So, that is, think of that image I just described. In its picturing a paradise, my sacred song a leaping place must find, as when obstruction in the highway lies. I can't get around this. I've got to jump around it somehow. Okay? So, he tells us, the reader, think of the theme's great weight. What's he mean, the great weight? What's the great significance of the Divine Comedy? It's individual salvation. Dante intends, his intent in writing this is for each person who reads it to see it like as a mirror, so that the individual who reads this, in seeing Dante's descent into hell, the reader sees him or herself do that same descent. And then the rise to purgatory and into heaven is the individual's spiritual journey. Why? So that when one closes the book, one will what? one will have as the greatest desire in one's life to partake of that same beatific vision that Dante closes the book with. So think of the theme's great weight, and bear in mind the mortal shoulder that must take the strain. Well, the strain, the holding of the weight. If it then tremble, must it be maligned. No sea for cockle boats is this great main through which my prow carves out adventurous ways. Nor may the steersman stint of toil and pain. Notice the metaphor. Okay? We, the individual readers, are the steersmen. This great main is this great theme. We've got to keep plowing through in our little ships. Beatrice, why art thou so enamored of my face? Thou wilt not turn thee to the garden bright shone on by Christ. Okay, she told him to look at him for a while, to look at her for a while. Now she's doing what? You've looked long enough. Now look what? Look beyond me, Dante. Okay? Look beyond me. See, she is kind of the obstruction. He's focusing on her. She's saying, go around. Look at the garden bright, the church triumphant, shone on by Christ and flowering in his rays. Look there. It's almost like she points. There blooms the rose wherein God's word was dight with flesh. Mary. In the Orthodox Church, we have a hymn where, sung during Great and Holy Week, where Mary is called the unwimmering rose. And I think unwimmering means unfading. The rose ever in bloom. Right? Where God's word was dight with flesh, and there the lilies blow who sent wooed man to take the road that runs aright. Let's see what Reynolds has for a footnote there. Yeah, it's the Virgin Mary. Okay, the lilies are the apostles. Okay. Let's see. So Dante says, thus Beatrice spoke, and he says, I, eager to consent to obey, I looked. In my frail vision, line 78, in my frail vision to the contest lent. Contest. It's a struggle, right? So he says, and so I looked, I tried. So countless thronging splendors I descried, line 82, ablaze with shafts of lightning from on high. Yet saw no fountainhead to this blazing tide. He sees innumerable splendors, and he keeps using that word, or at least the translator keeps using that same word, splendor. We're going to keep hearing it relating to it's God's overflowing glory. Okay, they're ablaze with shafts of lightning from on high. That is, their lighting comes from God. But saw no fountainhead. I don't see the source. Line 85. O power benign, whose seal on them doth lie so clearly, thou, to enlarge my vision, didst raise thyself aloft, sparing these eyes. Okay? You took yourself out of this vision, sparing me, because it would be too much. And for Dante at this point, it would be too much. The sound of that sweet flower's name, Mary's, whose praise morning and eve I sing, he praises Mary, Hail Mary, full of grace. I'm not Catholic, and I don't have this Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women. Blessed is the fruit of thy womb. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Okay? Prayers morning, evening, noon. Morning and eve I sung, my whole soul drew, and on that fire of fires led me to gaze. When, imaged upon both mine eyes, I knew the size and brilliance of that living star, who, as on earth, in heaven rules anew. It's talking about Christ. Sped from beyond that sphere, a flammifer ringed her about. That is, a source of flame, or a flame. It's talking about an angel. Ringed her about, spinning itself around, weaving a circle like a crown for her. Right? And let's see here. Line 103. Of the angelic loves am I. This is the flammifer that has come and is now spinning around Mary. And wine circling the joy sublime, breathed from the womb where once abode our hope for all mankind. Notice the joy sublime comes from the womb, that's Mary's womb, where once abode our hope for all mankind, that's Christ. Still circling, heavenly lady, will I come? I will always circle you, he's implying, to with thy holy presence thou hast filled in thy son's wake, that is the path that thy son has led, the sphere which is thy home. So she's going to proceed back to Empyrean. Now your gloss tells you that the speaker here may be Gabriel, who brought the Annunciation to Mary, okay? Or it might just be any seraph, who is the closest, the angelic order closest to God, are those who are, the ever moving lovers of God. Thus the entwining melody was sealed, all other lights together cried aloud. Through the sphere the name of Mary pealed, they all cry out Mary's name. The regal mantle which on high doth shroud the world's revolving layers, and nearest him is by God's breath with loveliest love endowed. So distant was, so far its nearest rim above us, that for all my scrutiny, its aspect to my vision still was dim. Wherefore my gaze could not accompany the crowned flame which rising from below to heaven returned, following her progeny. So the angel and Mary ascend. And Dante says, and I can't follow with my vision. It goes outside my sight. Okay? Line 136. He hears the angelic, song, all the church triumphant singing about the Queen of Heaven, the Regina Caeli. Line 136, or Seeley. 136. There too, victorious beneath the Son of God and Mary, amid the consistory of councils, new and ancient, triumphs one who holds the keys of such celestial glory. These are the keys of heaven and hell. It's Peter. Okay? So, Canto 24. Still in the eighth heaven, region of the fixed stars, Peter approaches. And we hear, interestingly, I think this is one of the only cantos, I'm just kind of flipping through, that begins with actual speech. Usually they begin with kind of a description. This is a voice. Quote, O fellowship of the elect who sup with Christ the Lamb, who doth so nourish you that full to overflowing is your cup. Okay? The supping with Christ the Lamb, that's the marriage feast of the Lamb, talked about in the book Revelation. They are so nourished that they're overflowing as a cup. Psalm 23, shall fill my cup to overflowing. If God by grace admits this man, if God by his grace admits this man, Dante, unto the broken meats that from your table fall, that is, the scraps that fall from the table of the elect, before the hour prescribed by death is due, if God allows him to come up to your presence in the vision, okay, before he dies, the boundless measure of his love recall, bedew him with some drops. Sprinkle him. Okay? Your fountainhead, whence comes what he thinks, is perpetual. This is Beatrice speaking. She's addressing Peter. Okay? Line 19. Dante says, from out the costliest ring, I looked on there, I saw a fire draw nigh. Not just a light, a fire. So full of bliss, no brighter star remained in all that sphere. Once, twice, and thrice, it circles Beatrice. Why? You'll notice when we see and meet Peter in paradise, because this isn't the first time, we've seen him before, he does things 3 times. And I think it's because on the night in which Christ was betrayed, what did he tell Peter he would do before the cock crows? He says, you will deny me 3 times. Peter says, never, not going to happen. And then he does. Okay? Denies Christ 3 times. I never knew him. I tell you, I know not the man. You're crazy. I don't know him. He hears the cock crow, and Peter runs out in tears. Right? After the resurrection, Christ appears to the disciples and stuff, a few times. And the last time, it's at Galilee. And you've got Peter and Christ and John, the beloved there. And 3 times, Christ asks Peter, Peter, do you love me? 3 times, Peter says, Lord, you know that I do. And each time, Christ says, feed my sheep, feed my sheep, feed my sheep. Okay? And I think each time we see Peter do something 3 times, it's the 3 betrayals, the 3 affirmations. It's Peter fulfilling ultimately the affirmations. So he circles Beatrice 3 times. Okay? Chanting the while, a song so heavenly my memory cannot I don't remember what it is Peter sang. Okay? And he says, but these words are close. So she responds, line 34, page 266. Eternal light of that great man, talking about Peter, the light is the soul, eternal light of that great man, to whom our Lord on earth bequeathed the keys, which from this wondrous joy below were taken, lightly and searchingly, as thou dost please, this person test and try concerning faith, by which thou once did walk upon the seas. If love and hope and faith he truly hath, thou knowest, for thine eyes are fixed upon the center which all visions mirroreth. That is, you know if he has love, hope, and faith, the 3 divine virtues. Okay? Why? Because Peter, she says, your eyes are fixed upon God. And you see in God the truth of all people, or the truth of at least the faith of all people. And notice she says, lightly and searchingly. Test Dante. Okay? And Dante's like, and I was like, as a bachelor's student, preparing, does not speak till the master the question is propounded. I did what? I prepared. I know I'm going to be tested over love, hope, faith. Okay? So Peter begins the disquisition, the questioning. Keep in mind, earning a bachelor's degree in the Middle Ages was not at all like earning a bachelor's degree in the United States. You studied, but you were examined essentially at the end. You had a long oral exam. You had oral exams for each class, but before you actually had the degree conferred upon you, you had an oral exam. So you would sit in a chair, you'd have the examiners, the doctors, sit behind like this, on this dais, behind a bench, almost like judges in a courtroom. And they would ask you a question, and you would give an answer. And the question would be an argument. And so you would, on the spot, deliver an oration in response. Okay? Multiple questions, all day affair. So Peter asks, what is faith? Okay. To that light I looked so, line 53, to that light I looked which so breathed forth to me the first words of the session. Excuse me. Session is an official term, and it refers to the sitting of like court in session. Okay. So this is his oral examination. He's being tried. And he refers to Peter, since grace is granted me for my creed's sake to speak before the chief centurion, that is the head of God's army, so to speak. He says, as truly wrote the pen, so I went on of thy beloved brother. He's talking about Paul, Peter and Paul, the first of the apostles. And he quotes Paul's writings in the book of Hebrews, Hebrews 11:1. The substance of things hoped for, faith must be, the argument of things visible, and this I take to be its quiddity, that is its essence. Hebrews 11:1, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. That's Hebrews 11:1. Okay? So Dante goes on. Excuse me. Peter says, truly, that is, point, you got it. But hast thou grasped the principle by faith was first as substance classified, and next among the arguments by Paul? And Dante replies, the mysteries of heaven here manifested as my sight perceives are to our mortal eyes on earth denied. That is, I can see these mysteries now, but down on earth, we can't see these. Hence, their existence, which I now know by sight is real, by faith conceives. Their existence is conceived in the mind. And hope's foundation thus doth represent wherefore the name of substance, sub, beneath, under, stance, position, stand. Get what he's saying? Faith is the underpinning of the conception of these ideas. If you don't have faith to begin with, you can never accept. You can notice even what that word accept. Okay? Accept means take hold of. Right? Acts to reach out to. Therefore, he says, line 76, and from this faith of things not evident, they're not seen, the vident relates to vision, okay? Our reasoning may proceed. Therefore, I see why it is designated argument. That is because we can argue on the basis of this evidence. If ever people grasp unerringly, as thou below, what doctrines inculcate, there would be little room for sophistry. That's Peter. Peter's like, well done. If everybody were like you, then we wouldn't have people walking around essentially selling lies. Okay? So, he says, let's see here. What about faith? Line 89. This precious stone, wherein all virtue founded is by right. Where did you get your faith? Dante. 91 and following. The text overflown by the outpouring of the Holy Ghost of Scriptures old and new to me have shown. The argument whereby such jewel most incisively concludes. In other words, my faith isn't blind. It's what? It's based on evidence. What's the evidence? The writings of the Holy Scripture, the Old and New Testament. Okay? Line 97. Peter, these premises thou dost submit, the old and new, as reasons for thy creed. How do you know that these are holy writ? How do you know that these are what they claim to be? Okay? Dante, the proof wherein the truth I read consists in works which knew not nature's hand, nor ever from her smithy could proceed. Okay? Peter's like, all right, keep going. What's the proof of that? And you can't testify by the writings themselves. That is, you can't say the Bible is the word of God because God inspired the Bible. That's circular reasoning. You gotta give me something else. Right? 106, Dante. If without miracles the world did bide by Christ, then all the miracles I know are by this one 100-fold outvied. For poor in fasting, and as if I can't use the miracles of Christ in the Bible as proof that the Bible is what it says it is, thou didst come to sow the land with seed from which a vineyard sprang, where now but thorns and bramble bushes grow. What? Dante's saying, how's this miracle? The growth of the church. You, Peter, sowed the seeds. How? Well, at the gift of Pentecost, day of Pentecost, when the Holy Spirit was given to the disciples, what did they do? They went out and they preached. And that day, according to Paul, in the book of, according to Luke in the book of Acts, what happened? 5,000 people became Christians. And then it just spread like wildfire. Dante is saying that is a miracle in and of itself. Okay? Just keep, it was religio illicita. It was illegal. Okay? So, when Dante finishes, notice the court of heaven rang with the Te Deum. To God be the glory. And Peter's kind of like, well done. Line 118. Grace lovingly doth woo thy mind, parting thy lips, that they may open as behooves them. This is Peter speaking. Well, he's talking about grace lovingly woos your mind and opens your lips. David in the Psalms, in Psalm 50 in one version of the Bible, Psalm 51 in the version probably most of you would be familiar with, most Protestants, Western Catholics and such. In Psalm 50/51, you have the line by David, open thou my lips, that my mouth might praise thy name. Okay? Grace lovingly doth woo thy mind, parting thy lips, that they may open as behooves them. As behooves them that you may speak the praise. Wherefore I approve what issued thence. In other words, you spoke well. Also, book of James, the epistle of St. James, where James says, be very careful about what proceeds from your mouth. Wherefore, now thou must say what thy creed is, and what authority before thy faith its evidence did lay. And so, he starts the creed. He doesn't literally recite the creed. 130. One God, eternal soul, my creed doth know. Creed there just means my belief. Mover of heavens, being himself unmoved, loving, desiring him, around they go. And it's interesting because he mixes in Aristotelian thought and Christian thought. And that's because Dante is thoroughly Thomistic. That is, he's thoroughly a follower of St. Thomas Aquinas, even though later on there's going to be something that he doesn't quibble with, in the sense that he says, and I differ from my master here. It's just he says something that is not something that St. Thomas Aquinas believed, right? But Thomas Aquinas tried to, what's the phrase I want? Tried to harmonize the writings of Aristotle with Christianity. He syncretized them, right? So he takes Aristotle's prime mover and makes it God. Even though Aristotle did describe, God that way, but he just kind of said, let's use the word God. It's not that he believed in a personal God, that kind of stuff. Anyways, so he goes on, line 133, and of such faith the articles are proved by physics, metaphysics, and that same truth which from this realm raining downward flows. So it's proven, that is my belief in God, the prime mover, by physics and metaphysics, and by what I've seen up here, through the truth which from this realm raining downward flowed through Moses, the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, the Psalms, David's writings, the prophets, and then came to the evangelists, and you, who wrote when you were hallowed by the tongues of flame. Hallowed, made holy by the tongues of flame. That's the day of Pentecost. 139. The 3 eternal persons, next I quote, as tenet of my faith. Remember the creed. I believe in one God, the Father Almighty, the maker of heaven and earth, and of all things visible and invisible. That's the first clause. One God. And in Jesus Christ, the only begotten of the Father, blah, 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 and in one Holy Spirit. So there's the 3 persons, right? And he finishes, and we hear the heavenly host, so to speak, the church triumphant, singing praise, because Dante's gotten it right, so to speak. Okay, Canto 25. Hold on, I gotta see what my timer says. What is my timer? Good grief, taking too long. St. James joins the band. And Dante's, in this canto, he confuses St. James the Lesser, also called James the Just, with St. James the Greater. St. James the Lesser, or James the Just, is the brother of Christ. Okay, James the Greater is James, the brother of John the Beloved, John the Theologian, John the writer of the Gospel. They are the 2 sons of Zebedee, okay, that are referred to in the Gospels. So let's see here. Where do I want to pick up? James comes in, let's say, page 275. Dante again raises his eyes. Line 37, 38. I raised unto the hill my eyelids, which are wound and downwards curled, since by his grace our heavenly Father, our heavenly Emperor wills, that with his noble lords thou shouldst consort in his most privy chamber, ere death stills thy voice, that is, God desires that you should come into his very presence in your body, that is, before you die. And notice the language that's used here. The emperor, his lords, his privy chamber, that is, into his kingly presence. It's all the language of empire or kingship. So, line 43, thy voice, so that remembering our court to hope, whence comes true love in humankind, thou mayst thyself and other men exhort. That is, we want you to use your voice, okay, to exhort other men How? By remembering heaven. For what purpose? To hope. To hope. We want you to encourage hope in mankind, whence comes true love in humankind. So, say what hope is, how it adorns thy mind. And thirdly, say whence unto thee hope came. Now, Canto 24, Peter interrogated Dante, ultimately about what? Faith. Remember those three divine virtues, faith, hope, and love? So Peter asked about faith. St. James asks about hope. And in the next canto, we're going to hear Dante quizzed on love. So, let's see here. Beatrice responds and says, line 52, no child of the church militant, that is, on the earth, still in the body, can vie with him in hope. She is kind of going, whoa, stop. Let me speak for him. There is no one alive on earth who has more hope than Dante. This blazoned in the sun, the light of all our hosts, thou mayst descry. That is, turn, not literally, because literally they are all always facing God. She says, this blazoned in the sun, what? You may descry. You can, descry means see. You can see in God's mind reflected Dante's hope. He's got the greatest hope of anyone on earth. Okay? Hence, leave to come from Egypt, he has one to see Jerusalem. What's Egypt? In bondage, in slavery, on earth, still in the body. He's come what? To Jerusalem, the heavenly Jerusalem, the heavenly city, the new Jerusalem. If you go back and read the introduction, well, I think it's in this book, it's in the second book, and it's in Inferno, the introduction that Sayers writes, and she quotes the letter from Dante to Con Grande della Scala, okay, where he talks about the fourfold interpretation. And he says, here, let me use an example to show you what I mean. And he uses a quote from, I think it is Exodus, about the Jews leaving Egypt out of slavery and bondage and into freedom and, God's presence. And he goes through it literally, allegorically, anagogically, and mystagogically, the fourfold interpretation. Okay? So she goes on. The two remaining points which thou wouldst hear, not to increase thy knowledge, that is, you aren't asking, or you don't need to know this so that you know more, because you already know, but to train him, to train Dante, to tell on earth how thou up here in heaven dost hold hope dear. I leave to him, for they will not restrain him, nor by self-praise cause modesty disaster. That is, I couldn't let Dante talk about himself for his hope, because that would be kind of selfish. It would be conceited. It would be narcissistic. So let him speak, and may God's grace sustain him. Okay? And I should have mentioned line 55. Though he hence leave to come from Egypt, he has one to see Jerusalem. Though many a year his soldiering on earth has yet to run, she's telling Dante, kind of obliquely there, by the way, when you go back to earth, you're not going to die soon. You still have a few years. He probably didn't have as many years as he thought he had. Dante died at, what did I say, 56? Yeah. He's writing this in sometime between 1313 and maybe 1318. He dies in 1321. Okay, so Dante begins. He's answering, what is hope? Line 67. Hope is certainty of bliss to come, which God by grace to us concedes, and for our previous merit promises. Notice it's grace and merit. Well, how can it be? What's merit? Works. Works. Literally, it's what it is. Good works. If you're a Protestant, you believe you're saved by grace and faith alone. Because that's what Luther taught. That's what John Calvin taught. It's what all the Protestant churches believe. That no matter what you do, your good works account for absolutely nothing. If, however, you go back and read the New Testament carefully, what do you see Christ repeatedly say? Look at his parable of the Last Judgment at the end of in Matthew 25. Okay, he says, "Here's what's going to happen. Judgment's going to happen, and I'm going to say to the sheep, go on my right side, into the heaven that's prepared for you, and to the goats, I'm going to say, go to the left side, into the hell prepared for you." And he's going to say, to those who go into my right side, when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was thirsty, you gave me drink. When I was naked, you clothed me. When I was sick, you aided me. When I was in prison, you visited me. And they're going to say unto me, Lord, when were you hungry and I fed you? When were you thirsty and I gave you drink? When were you naked and I clothed you? When were you ill and I gave you aid? When were you in prison and I visited you? And Christ says, and I will reply, inasmuch as you've done it unto the least of these, you did it unto me. Notice every one of those is what? It's an action. Feeding, giving drink to, clothing, visiting, helping. None of those is a belief. None of those is an idea. Okay? And those who go off into the left, he said they're going to cry out and they're going to say, Lord, Lord, I preached, I did good works in your name. And he's going to say, depart into hell. Why? Because you didn't do these things. When I was hungry, you didn't give me food. When I was thirsty, you didn't give me drink. When I was naked, you didn't give me clothes. When I was sick, you didn't visit me. And when I was in prison, you didn't comfort me. You didn't come help me. There's another one in there that I completely left off. When I was homeless, you didn't invite me in your home. Lord, when did we not do these things? Inasmuch as you did it not unto the least of these. Unto the least of these, anyone you see around you who is hungry, thirsty, naked, poor, sick, in prison. Mind-blowing, right? St. Paul preaches salvation by grace, salvation by faith. St. Paul doesn't denigrate works, okay? In the Epistle of St. James, James says, faith without works is dead. In other words, if you have faith, you will do good works. So if you don't have the good works, according to the Epistle of St. James, you don't have faith. St. John, John the Beloved, John the Evangelist, John the Theologian, says in one of his letters that if we have not love, we have not God. And he gives us an example. If you don't do good works to those you can't see, if you don't feed someone that you can see, if you don't show love to those you see, how can you love that which you don't see? God. Okay? Luther, Martin Luther, founder of the Lutheran Church, when he translated the New Testament, he didn't think you should read the Epistle of St. James. He called it the Epistle of Straw. Okay? He did not think it should be included in the canon of the New Testament because of its emphasis on doing good works. Because Luther didn't think you could ever do enough good works. Because Luther was arguing against the Roman Catholic teaching of the Middle Ages, which became that good works drew down grace, that good works earned grace. That's not what Dante's talking about here. Look at, again, what he says. Hope, I began, line 67, is certainty of bliss to come, which God by grace to us concedes, and for our previous merit promises. Right? Does the merit come, does the grace come from the merit? No. But Luther is also arguing against the Catholic, long after Dante, I believe, the Catholic doctrine that when Christ died on the cross, he essentially put in the divine bank account innumerable merits that we could draw on. Okay? Became the doctrine of indulgences, that I could commit a sin and I could purchase an indulgence, and that indulgence buys me time off in purgatory. I mean, Luther, rightly, I would argue, was totally against that notion. So, Dante goes on, for many stars this light to me proceeds, that is, this theology, this belief system, to me proceeds, but he who first instilled it in my heart, in praising God, all songs of praise exceeds. He's talking about David, the psalmist. Okay? Line 73, Spirit in te, hope in you. So sings he in one part of his psalmody, who thy name know. Okay? He's essentially saying, many suggest this, that all of the Psalms are ultimately showing hope in God. Okay? 76. Next in thine own epistle, thou didst so instill me with this is due, that evermore brimmed with your rain on others I overflow. He says, your epistle instilled me with this dew, that I overflow on others this hope. Okay? And this, by the way, is where he's confusing the two Jameses. James, the brother of the Lord, wrote the epistle, not James, the brother of John the Evangelist. Okay? And we're told James kind of like that because the flame, flares up and stuff. Let's see here. Line 91, he refers to Isaiah. Each, saith Isaiah, shall enrobed be in twofold robe, each in his promised land, which is this life of sweet felicity. The twofold robe is soul and body in his promised land, heaven, which is this life of sweet felicity there in heaven. That is, Isaiah promised that there would be a physical resurrection, that the body would be reunited to. Line 94, this revelation by thy brother's hand, that's St. John the Evangelist, St. John the theologian, St. John, the beloved of the Lord. It's St. John, the writer of the Apocalypse, book of Revelation. Not the brother of the guy who wrote the epistle. It's okay, a lot of people get confused. Okay? And what happens? John the beloved appears. Line 100. Next appeared so bright one light's display of such a crystal, blah, 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 blah. So line 112. Beatrice explains, this light is he who leant upon the breast of Christ our pelican. This is the St. John, the beloved, who at the Last Supper leaned upon the breast of Christ and said, you know, who is it? That is, Christ said, one of you is going to betray me. And Peter nudged John and said, ask him who it is. And John asked. And from the cross was chosen to fulfill the great request. What's the great request? Christ is hanging there on the cross. He looks down at John, who is at the foot of the cross. He's the only one of the apostles, who stays. And there's Mary, the mother of Jesus, and Mary Magdalene. And Jesus looks down at John and says to Mary, woman, behold thy son, looking at John, and behold thy mother. And in doing that, he's giving John direction to, from that moment on, take Mary into his household and treat her as his own mother. Okay? It's also spiritually, anagogically, if you want, interpreted. She's the mother of the church. Okay? She's the first one who believed, be it unto me as thou hast said, she says to the angel Gabriel, and becomes, quote unquote, at that point, the first Christian, because she's the first one to take Christ into her. Anyways, line 121. So Dante really looks at this light. He's, like squinting, trying to, and John asks him, why treatest thou so ill thy sight, seeking in me what the world keeps? Why are you trying to look in me for what's not there? Earth in the earth, my body lies. That is, my body is dead. It's there. And because of the, belief that some had that John would see Christ in his body in heaven, that he wouldn't die, right? It's there at the end of the Gospel of John, right? Because Christ says, what is it to you if he see me, in his body? Well, that's Christ telling John and Peter that John's going to have a vision of the apocalypse, essentially, right? Line 127. Two only who straightway to heaven did mount in our blessed cloister, in both robes are clad, both robes, body and soul. Now your gloss tells you in the back, the notes, that that's Christ and Mary. Not sure that it is. Mary, Catholic Orthodox doctrine, her body was assumed into heaven at what's called the Domitian, the falling asleep. Okay? Or Catholic doctrine, sorry, not Orthodox. I think it might not be Mary in Christ. I think it might be Enoch and Elijah. Enoch walked with God and was no more. That doesn't mean he died. Okay? Moses, we're told, definitely, God took him up on the hill overlooking the promised land, but he died on Mount Gilead. I think it's Mount Gilead, right? Elijah was taken up into heaven in the fiery chariot in his body. So, you know, enigma. Lines 136 and following, Dante is blind. He turns and looks to Beatrice, and he finds himself outcast from her sight. He can't see, even though I was near her in the realm of bliss. Okay. Stanza, Canto 26. So we begin, and Dante's fearful because his eyes are blinded and such. And St. John speaks to him and says, you know, don't worry, you'll get your sight back. He says, you have consumed your sight, seeking for, you know, in me for what's not there. He says, so until your sight comes back, let's talk. And he says, say what your soul clings to. And Dante answers, swiftly or slowly, line 13, as she will, may she restore these eyes, that were the gate she entered with the fire that burns me still. That is, in her own good time, let Beatrice restore my eyesight, because it's in my eyes that allowed me to see her, and it was seeing her that love entered me. Line 16. The good which in this court all longing saints, Alpha and Omega, is of every text, which love in accents soft or loud dictates. Okay? The good, God is the fulfillment of all longing. That's, he sates, he satisfies it. The self-same voice which from my soul perplexed had vanished fear, for discourse once again made me attentive as it breathed for next. Okay, so John speaks again, top of page 283. Okay, we gotta dig down a little bit deeper. So now through a finer sieve thou needs must strain thy words. Who guided then thy shaft to fly at such a target? Who drew you to love? John. Dante says, well, philosophy, by philosophic arguments and by authority which from this realm descended, such love of good imprints me with its dye. For good, as far as apprehended, enkindles love so far. Boethius talks about that, right? And as much more as good within itself is comprehended. Okay? St. James, in his epistle, talks about God as being the giver of all good gifts. Good as good enkindles love. Okay? Trying to read my note that I wrote here. Something about good when apprehended. Well, good is good as far as apprehended. Good, when it's apprehended as good, enkindles the desire for more goodness. And that's largely what Boethius talked about. Once you understand what the good is, you desire the good even more. Dante, 31. Hence, towards that essence, where abides such store of goodness, God, that all goodness elsewhere found derives its, there it is again, its splendor from that radiant core. The loving mind is, as it must be, bound to move. More than to all else, if it know the truth which is this demonstration's ground. The loving mind, once it apprehends that goodness, is bound to move towards that goodness. Even Aristotle said, the summum bonum is the highest, greatest goal of every soul. It desires goodness, right? That's why he talks about Aristotle in the next stanza. And let's see here. He then quotes Moses. Um, line 52. Yeah, 49. John asks another question. Are there other cords which pull thee tight to him? Show by thy words how many are the teeth whereby this love of thine doth bite. In other words, okay, so you've quoted Moses, you kind of alluded to Aristotle, you've talked about kind of Boethian ideas. What else draws you to God? Line 52, the sacred purpose of Christ's Aquila, eagle. That's what Aquila means, right? The eagle is the emblem of John the Beloved. Beneath this question was plain to me, and so Dante says, all ratchets which can severally resolve the heart towards God cooperate and are indented with my charity. That is, everything that causes my heart to revolve toward God are full of love. Line 58. The being of the world and my own state, that is, existence itself, draws me to God. The death he died that I might live the more, the crucifixion, the hope in which I by faith participate, the living truth which I conveyed before have dredged me from the sea of wrongful love. Dante's telling us, and he's telling St. John, I didn't always think this way, I didn't always see this way. And of the right have set me on the shore. They've set me on the right shore. And through the garden of the world I rove, enamored of its leaves in measure solely, as God the gardener nurtures them above. He's saying, I don't love the leaves of this world solely for the leaves of this world. He said, the leaves draw me to the gardener who takes care of the plants. The beauties of this world draw me to the source of those beauties. And it's not the beauties themselves. And when he finishes, the heavenly choir and Beatrice sing, Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty. Okay? Line 79. So, his eyes are opened, and he now sees even better than he did before he went blind. Line 79. New clarity was mine, and in a maze of the new light I begged to know the state. For where there had been three, now four did blaze. Peter, James, and John. Now there's a fourth light. Therein, Beatrice says, therein doth radiate in worship of his maker the first soul that ever primal virtue did create. Peter, James, John, in Adam. Okay? So Dante addresses Adam. And he says, please speak to me. So Adam does. Line 103. Though of thy wish thou utterest no word, that is, you haven't told me what you really want to know, yet my discernment of it doth surpass all certainty of which thou art most assured. For I behold it truly in the glass, mind of God, in which all things their perfect image show, yet which in naught its perfect image has. And here's what it is you wish to know. To learn how long ago God set me in the earthly paradise, were apt for this ascent thy soul to grow. If you want to know, when was I created? How long such loveliness rejoiced my eyes? You also want to know how long I lived in paradise before the fall. The true occasion of the mighty wrath, the language which I spoke informed likewise. So you want to know when I was created. You want to know how long I lived before I fell. You want to know what really happened. Was it all for an apple, as a medieval English carol says? You want to know what language I spoke? 115. 'Twas not the tasting of the fruit that hath, my son, earned of itself such banishment. It wasn't merely plucking and eating, but solely the transgression from the path. The transgression from the path. What's that mean? I stepped off the way. You know, Christ says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. In the Old Testament, when God speaks to Abraham, God says, if you walk in my ways, okay? He says to Moses, if you walk in my ways and obey my commands, that is, if you follow in the path I give you, you will be blessed immeasurably. Adam, God says, you can eat of any tree in this garden. Just don't touch this one. So it's like there's innumerable paths that lead to all these different trees. And it's almost like there's not a path to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And what does Adam do? He steps off the path. He goes his own way. He turns his sight away from God. He says, that's what did it. As soon as he turns away, that he's made his error, that he sinned. Okay? From where thy lady to thee Virgil sent, okay, the where, that's where Virgil was, limbo. Thy lady, Beatrice, came down to Virgil in limbo. I longed for this assembly while the sun 4,302 circles went. That is, I spent 4,302 years in limbo. Well, when did he leave limbo? Crucifixion. When Christ harrowed hell. Adam was the first one he took. Okay? So, Adam was created. If you take out 4,302, add Adam's years on earth, 930, okay? Subtract 33 from that, you get 5,198 years, all right? BC, that's when Adam was created, okay? And you've got a note that explains that on page 289. So creation of Adam, 5,198 BC. Adam dies 4,268 BC. Christ descends into hell, AD 34. 7. Okay. Line 124. Long was extinct the language which I spoke. Your work on the unfinishable tower, first contemplated was by Nimrod, Tower of Babel. Okay. No work of reason. And then he goes on and he talks about language. Language changes. Dante acknowledges language changes over time. You know, the big question was, what was the original language? First, you know, what are called philologists, people who study language to understand written text and such. Not people who study language for language per se. Those are linguists. You know, they wanted to try to find out what was the first language that humans spoke. It was a medieval idea. It lasted through the Renaissance, up into the 18th century by quite a few people, that Hebrew was. That Hebrew was the language of Eden, okay? And that's why he has, ere I descended to the pains of hell, Yah was the name men called the highest good. And there's a note telling you, you know, it's part of the word hallelujah. You have Elijah, etc. Line 133 and following. The form Yah still survives as the final syllable of hallelujah. El signifying the mighty is an ancient general name for the deity, etc., etc. Okay. Let's see here. Okay, let's go on to Canto. Oh, I'm taking way too long. 27. Peter transforms, so to speak. He doesn't literally, he's still a fire, but now it gets all big and red and everything. And he just pun intended, lights into Boniface, the Pope. This is Boniface the Eighth, 22 and following. He that on earth has dared usurp that place of mine, that, again, 3 times, that place of mine which now stands vacant before God's Son's face. When Christ looks at Rome, there's no Pope. Might also be because at the time Dante's writing this, you have what's called the Babylonian captivity of the papacy. You had 2 popes. You had a pope in Rome, and you had a pope in Avignon, France. Each one had excommunicated the other. So, who is the pope? And he talks about the corruption. Let's see here. He then goes on, lines 40 and following, mentions martyrs for the faith and who, you know, the things they did to build up the church and what the current Pope is doing to tear down the church. Line 46, never by our intention was it willed that Christendom should sit on either hand of those who after us, that is, that it should be divided, nor that the keys bequeathed to me should stand as emblem and a banner, because he's talked about the Pope going to war against other Christians, and the keys of Peter are emblems on the battle flags, etc., etc. And he gives a charge to Dante, top of 293, line 64. And thou, my son, whose weight must draw thee down to earth once more. Why? Because he's still in the body. Open thy mouth and speak. The things that I hide not, see thou make known. In other words, Dante, when you go back to your body and you're writing the Divine Comedy, don't pull any punches. Okay? Speak the truth. Well, let's use a modern phrase. Speak truth to power. Okay? Let's see here. So Dante looks back at Earth again. They rise to the prima mobile. Line 100, this heaven, the liveliest and loftiest. Why liveliest? It's the heaven closest to God. Therefore, it's the most full of life, because God is the God of the living and not of the dead. Okay? And Beatrice speaks to him, line 106. The nature of the universe which stills the center and revolves all else, from here as from its starting point, all movement wills. That is, this is the beginning of movement in the universe. This is the first moving sphere of all the moving spheres. This heaven it is which has no other where than the divine mind. The empyrean, the prima mobile, exists in the mind of God, and everything else comes from that. 'Tis but in the mind that love its spur, and the power it reigns in here. In here they hold together. The light and love which round this circle wind, As it enfolds the rest, the light and love, that's the empyrean that surrounds the prima mobile. As it unfolds the rest, he comprehends by whom alone such girdle is confined. Okay, but God is unconfined. What confines God? His light and his love, which again is unconfined. This circle's motion, it's paradox. This circle's motion takes no measurements from other spheres beneath, but theirs computes. That is, the spheres beneath do not affect the spheres above. This sphere, the prima mobile, computes the movements of all the other spheres. It accounts for, because it moves the region of the fixed stars, which moves the region of Saturn, which moves the region of Jupiter, which moves the region of Mars, which moves the region of the Sun, Venus, Mercury, Moon, etc. Okay. So she says, as in a plant pot, then, time has its roots herein, and where the other heavens trace their course, thou mayst behold its shoots. Time begins in the prima mobile. So everything outside there is outside time. Think of Boethius. Where is God? He's out here in the empyrean. Where's everybody else? They're all out here. They see into time. And what can they see? Because they're in the presence of God. They see in the mind of God the future. All right? And then she launches on about cupidity, avarice, greed. And, if people weren't so stupid, they would see what's really important. Let's see here. Canto 28, page 301. Dante looks into Beatrice's eyes. This is Canto 28, and says, I'm going to pick up on line 16. One point I saw, so radiantly bright, so searing to the eyes it strikes upon, they needs must close before such piercing light. Okay, and he gives a simile, and then he says, line 25, about this point, and again, he's still seeing this in the reflection in her eyes. About this point, a fiery circle whirled. With such rapidity, it had upraced the swiftest sphere revolving round the world. This by another circle was embraced, this by a third, and he keeps going down until he sees 9 circles of light spinning around this one central point of light. Okay? And we're told, line 37, purest in flame the inmost circle proved, being nearest the pure spark. Or so I venture, that is, I surmise, I suppose, most clearly with its truth, it is engrooved. All right. So he's seeing this in the reflection in Beatrice's eye. She's looking at him, obviously, and she sees his face just full of wonder. And she says, from this point, the point of light reflected in her eye, hang the heavens and all nature. The heavens and all nature, all created things. Behold the circle nearest it, and know it owes its rapid movement to the spur of burning love, which keeps it whirling so. And Dante, for lack of a better way of putting it, is introduced to the 9 angelic orders. Not introduced like hi, how you doing, introduced, he's taught the one circle, the smallest circle that spins most rapidly around the point of light. That's the circle of the seraphim. They are the ones in perpetual motion, in burning with love for God. The cherubim are supposed to be the kind of intellectual desire for God. Right? So, line 64. It's like Dante's got some questions, and so she resolves them. 64 and following. Material circles in the heavens make their courses, wide or small, as more or less, through all their parts of virtue they partake. The greater good makes greater blessedness, more matter must enclose. It follows parts of equal perfectness. So the largest of the spheres, not the angelic spheres, the nine spheres, has the greatest good and the most blessedness, which it imparts to that below. So that one has a little bit less good, a little bit less blessedness, till you get down to what? Us. The least good and the least blessedness, according to Dante's portrayal. I won't, if we had more time, I'd probably do a second lecture on, my response, my, critique, let's say, because I don't agree with a lot of Dante's theology. I agree with much of what he says, but there's some I very much disagree with. So she says, line 70, it follows that the sphere, which as it goes turns all the world along, must correspond to this, the inmost, which most loves and knows. Okay? So the prima mobile has to correspond to that smaller sphere which spins rapidly around the center point of light. Hence, if thou wilt but cast thy measure round, the angels' power, not their circumference, as it appears to be, it will be found that wondrous is the perfect congruence which every heaven with every mover shows between their corresponding measurements. So, that smallest circle that spins around the point of light, which is God, the smallest circle is the seraphim. That corresponds to the primum mobile, which is the largest circle. Okay? And the next smallest circle, the cherubim, that corresponds to the region of the fixed stars. You go all the way down to the largest circle that moves the slowest around God, the fixed point of light. That corresponds to the smallest circle, which encircles the world. That's the angelic, simple, plain, garden variety angel. All right? So, Dante says, line 85. He doesn't say, he thinks. So did my understanding there grow keen soon as I heard her luminous reply. Luminous, it's enlightening. And like a star in heaven, the truth was seen. Her words, when they had ceased, were greeted by a sparkling of scintillas in the spheres. That is, like when, I think the gloss is given, like, or maybe it's just a little bit later on, like when, you hit a piece of hot metal with a hammer on an anvil, it sparks, right? Or hit a glowing log, it's almost turned to charcoal. Hit it with something and sparks fly off. He says, tracing each fiery circle that was theirs, they numbered myriads more than the entire progressive doubling of the chessboard squares. And there's a footnote about that, okay? 93. Take a grain of wheat doubled as many times as there are squares on a chessboard. By geometrical progression, 1 plus 2 plus 4 plus 8, that is 1 times 2 is 2, 2 times 2 is 4, 4 times 2 is 8, 8 times 2 is 16, do all the way throughout. The total figures for the number of squares there are on a chessboard goes into the millions. Okay? Think of a chessboard made up of 64, I think it is, individual squares. You add all of the squares up on a chessboard, Because bear in mind, 4 squares make up another square. And then, so Dante's saying millions upon millions of angelic beings that he's now seeing the sparks of light. So she says, 97. Is it right? Yes. 98. The seraphim and cherubim, the first ring and the next to thee displays, in eagerness to grow the more like him. Their path they follow, and succeed so far and measure as their vision is sublime. See, here's an example of where I think, my theology differs from Dante's. And I guess this is Catholic theology, or was at least in the Middle Ages, that the angelic beings can become more and more and more like God. I don't think that's the case. I'm not positive, but I think in the Orthodox Church, the angelic beings will, in position, so to speak, states are fixed. It's humans that can grow more and more and more and more like God. I think. I could be wrong in terms of what the Orthodox Church teaches, but the Catholic Church seems to be saying that the Archangel Gabriel can progress. Okay. Anyways, she goes on and she names the 9 angelic orders. Okay. So, seraphim, cherubim, thrones. Go down to the next circle, line 115 and following, where she names them as line 122, dominations, virtues, and powers. Okay. The final circle, the final triad of 3 ranks of angelic being, princedoms, archangels, angels. And she mentions St. Dionysius, the Areopagite. It was a belief in the Middle Ages that the St. Dionysius, the Areopagite, that's mentioned in the book of Acts, was the author of this book called this tract called the Celestial Hierarchy. Now that is attributed to Dionysius, is attributed to pseudo Dionysius, the Areopagite, because we know that the real St. Dionysius, the one that St. Paul converts, did not write that. Okay, so she mentions Dionysius, then she mentions Gregory the Great, who came up with a differing ordering of the angels, and then your footnote mentions Brunetto Latini, Dante's teacher, who came up with a third one. And you've got the ordering, those 3 orders on page 308, right? So St. Dionysius, pseudo-Dionysius the Areopagite, the author of the Celestial Hierarchy, has seraphim, cherubim, thrones, dominions, virtues, powers, principalities, archangels, angels. St. Paul talks about we wrestle not with flesh and blood, but with angelic beings. He gives these orders in a variety of places in his letters. Talks about thrones, powers, dominions, etc. Gregory, seraphim, cherubim, thrones, dominions, principalities, powers, virtues, archangels, angels. Okay? Notice they all 3 start with seraphim and cherubim, and they all end with archangels and angels. It's the ones in between that vary. Okay? All right, Canto 39. Let's see here. We're still in the Prima Mobile and line 10. So Dante's, he's got more questions. But Beatrice says, I'll tell, not ask what thou wouldst know, for thy desire I see, where centers everywhere and every wind. That is, I see your desire where? In the mind of God. That's the center of every where, all places, and every wind. Remember that quote that I mentioned from the introduction? God is the circle whose circumference is everywhere and whose center is nowhere. God is a circle whose center is everywhere and its circumference nowhere. So every point on any compass, on any map, the idea is you focus at one spot, God's the center of that spot. You go to another spot, and God's the center of that spot. Okay? So she says, line 13, not to increase his good, which cannot be. If God is all goodness, then he cannot lack any goodness. Therefore, he cannot need any goodness. Boethius talked about that. But that his splendor shining back might say, behold, I am in his eternity, beyond the measurement of night and day, beyond all boundary, as he did please, new love's eternal love shed from his ray. It blows my mind, but I think what she's saying, what Dante is saying, is God is effervescing love. He could not help but create. And what he created says, behold, I am. And the behold, I am is a reflection of ego eimi. I am. Okay? Or ego, I am. Ego eimi is I am he. Okay? Nor did he lie before this as at ease, for neither first nor after did proceed the moving of the spirit of the seas. In other words, there's no time passage. You can't say first before. You can't say God was lying, like, waiting, right? Pure form, pure matter, form and matter wed, line 22. Pure form, pure intelligence, pure matter, pure physicality of stuff, subatomic particles of stuff. Form and matter wed. Now, the gloss tells you, the notes tell you that that's the material universe. I'm not sure, because I kind of think pure form, pure intelligence, angelic beings. Pure matter, physical stuff. Fiat lux, let there be light. And God saw the light and said it was good, and the night, the evening, and the morning were the first day. And then God creates the heaven and the earth, okay? Physical stuff, so to speak. Form and matter wed, form, intelligence, angelic, stuff, wed with matter. Well, angelic beings have no matter. We do, animals do, plants do. They have a different level of intellect, intelligence, right? Think of what Boethius says about the different kinds of intelligence and such. See, I'm kind of thinking the form and matter wed is animal, sentient, of whatever variety, kind of life, okay? So she goes on. 28. So the threefold creation of the sire, God, from its beginning without sequences, rayed into being, instant and entire. Order created with the substances, distinguishing pure act from potency. Potency is the ability of action, not necessarily action itself. The summit of the world established these. Pure potency was lowest in degree. Why? Because dirt in and of itself doesn't do something, right? But it has the capability. Drop a seed. It can produce life. Midway came potency with act entwined, by withy that shall never unwithy be. And I think that's referring to us. See, pure act is intellect, immediate knowing, so to speak. Pure power, if you want, right? We're midway between that. You can read the notes about it, okay? skip a bit. Go down to line 55. The fall's beginning, it's the fall of Adam and Eve, or, sorry, Lucifer, was the pride accursed of one whom thou hast seen deep in the pit. The world with all its weight holds him encased, coerced. These other angels, those that didn't fall, humbly did admit, and bear in mind, Inferno was filled with angels. All those who are doing things to the damned souls are the fallen angelic beings. These other angels humbly did admit the goodness which they have their providence, whence they have their providence and understanding, for this joy made fit. That is, when they were created, they bowed down before God, they acknowledged their being in his likeness because of their being, and they were made fit. That's why they were made, to acknowledge. Merit and grace, their vision so enhanced that now their will steadfast and perfect grown. That means their will is now unchangeable. You couldn't now, whether at the time of Dante's vision or let's say even 2021, 2020, sorry. I want 2020 to be over so fast. That let's say you believe that the angel Gabriel exists, that the angel Gabriel could now decide to go against God. Nope, can't happen. Not according to most theology. The angelic beings, their wills are now fully fixed. They're not fully fixed because God has imposed them. It's because they have fully joined them to God's will. And that's why I think, to go back to one of the previous things I said, they can't progress. They can't become more and more and more like God. They are as like God as they will be, right? Lest thy belief should waver, be it known that merit dwells in the receipt of grace in measure as the heart to it is prone, right? Merit dwells in the receipt. Merit in the accepting of grace in measure as the heart is what? Open to grace. Open to it. So it's the accepting of it that's the merit that merits more, right? Line 70, she talks about the church scholastics, your schoolmen, argue still that mid-endowments of angelic nature are understanding, memory, and will. And she's going on to inform him, no, not quite. Okay? She says they don't have memory. The angelic beings don't. Line 79, hence, as no sight unknown can intervene to cleave their vision or their concepts break, no thoughts need they recall of what has been. They can't take a break. They can't pause from worshiping God and saying, you know, I remember. He is the entire focus of their being. And I think, and I could be wrong, I could obviously be way wrong here, that in one sense, Dante is also saying, if not the same, something very similar for humans. So the notion that, you know, heaven is going to be a family reunion where, you know, one goes and sees, you know, grandpa and great grandpa and aunts and uncles and brothers and sisters, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like a giant picnic on a beautiful, sunny, but not too hot, you know, spring day. The wind's just right. You know, there's no bugs. You know, your dead favorite pets are running and gamboling around and such. I think Dante, at the very least, would say, no, that's not quite right. Why? Because what's the focus on there? My pleasure based upon what? My memories. When the focus of heaven, even according to the book of Revelation, is what? The Son and the Father and the Spirit. It's the focus is on God. Okay. And then she goes on to Sister Beatrice speaking, right? Yeah. She goes on to launching into preachers. The preachers who don't preach the Bible, who preach their interpretation. Okay. She goes on page 312. All men to show their ingenuity contrive their own inventions. These they preach. Notice, they preach their inventions. The gospel is passed over silently. So she gives an example of what caused the darkness from the 6th to the 9th hour when Christ was crucified. And she said, oh, well, some say, the moon moved backwards and it caused an eclipse. Scripture doesn't say it. The New Testament says nothing about what caused the darkness. It was just darkness came over the earth or the land, depending on which gospel. Okay? So they're trying to give an explanation for it rather than just say it's a mystery. Line 106. So that the silly sheep, the parishioners, all unaware, come home from pasture fed on emptiness. Because they don't know any better. They don't know what the scriptures say for the simple reason they don't have it in their own language. The Bible was not available in Italian in Dante's day. It was not available in English. Not all of it, parts of it were. Okay. No harm they see, no less of guilt they bear. Now, here's another point where I would disagree with Dante. Dante's saying they don't see any harm in what they're learning. But he is saying, but they're still guilty for not knowing. No less of guilt they bear. He is saying they're still guilty for what they're not seeing. That doesn't comport with, for example, my idea of God. So, Christ, his apostles, did not thus address. Christ didn't say to the apostles, go forth, preach idle stories to all men. Idle, meaning empty, useless, but taught them his true doctrine to profess. He says, go baptize all nations in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, etc., etc. Forth with his shield, the apostles sally then, none other than his word their lips escapes. That is, and what the apostles taught was what Christ preached. This only is the sword they wield amain. But nowadays, 115, this is, in one sense you could think of this, what did St. John tell Dante to do? When you go back down there, preach it all, man. Say the truth. Peter, said that. Okay? Called him son and said, say exactly what I'm telling you. In a sense, this is Dante doing that. But nowadays, men preach with jokes and japes. If you go to church, how often do you hear the preacher telling a joke? Opening with a joke. Or opening with a story. Okay? And if they raise a laugh, their cowls all swell with pride. That is, if they get the parishioners to laugh and chuckle, then they think, oh, that was a good one on my part. Oh, I'm so good. Okay, 130. The angelic nature, so she realizes I've digressed. The angelic nature in number doth extend so far beyond the range of mortal mind, no tongue or thought has ever reached the end. You can't even comprehend the number of angels there are. And in the book of Daniel, thou wilt find in She mentions, for all the thousand thousands he there states, no fixed and final figure is assigned. Look it up. Daniel says, oh, blast, I had it pulled up. Sorry, hold on 1 second. Daniel 1:35. 7:9 through 10. I continued to watch until thrones were put in place, and the Ancient of Days enthroned himself. His clothing was white as snow. Hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was a fiery flame, its wheels a burning fire. A river of fire flowed from before him. Thousands and thousands ministered to him, and countless thousands stood before him. Kind of like Carl Sagan's old Cosmos TV series, billions and billions and billions, unnumbered. The primal light the whole irradiates and is received therein as many ways as there are splendors wherewith all it makes. So, line 142. Consider well the breadth, behold the height of his eternal goodness, seeing that o'er so many mirrors it doth shed its light. It sheds its lights over mirrors, and what do those mirrors do? Each one of those splendors, the effervescing creations of God, does what? It mirrors back to God. Well, what is each one of those things? If you take Dante literally, it's this, and this, and this, and this. Everything bodies forth the image of God. Okay? It's Gerard Manley Hopkins's pied beauty, if you want. And I'm blank on his other side. Okay? So, Canto 30. The circles fade. Beatrice is transformed. Dante is bathed. Your thing says swathed in light. Okay? He turns and looks at her, page 318. Because all these other images kind of fade away, so he turns to look at her. And he sees, or says, line 14, whence I to Beatrice must needs transfer my gaze, for love and lack of aught to view. Turn to her because of my love for her and what she represents, and because there wasn't anything else to see. And he was like, beauty past knowledge was displayed to me, line 19. Not only ours, the joy of it complete, her maker knows, I think, and only he. The joy of it complete, her beauty complete. And I think that means body and soul. Only God knows. Look at Revelation. We're told in the book of Revelation, each of the redeemed has a name that only God and the redeemed know. So it's like, each individual and God have a secret. Nobody else knows what that secret is. Talk about connection, okay? So Dante goes on, line 25. For her sweet smile remembered, as the beam of sunlight blinds the weakest eyes at gaze, bewilders all my wits and scatters them. Now, skipping a stanza, in her beauty wake my song can thrust its following flight no farther. I give o'er as at his heart's end, every artist must, that is, I'm beyond words. And she tells him, We have won beyond the worlds. We're out of the spheres and move within that heaven which is pure light alone. What's the pure light? It's the light of God. It's the light of God's essence. Pure intellectual light, fulfilled with love. Love of the true good, filled with all delight, transcending sweet delight, all sweets above. So anything that you take as delightful here, a poor imitation of its real source. And twofold is the host of heavenly might, thou'lt here behold, and one in that same guise, which on the judgment day will greet thy sight. Twofold, he's going to see the souls of people kind of in two ranks. Those from the Old Testament, those from the New Testament and forward. Okay? Line 49. So now a living light encompassed me, and veil so luminous I was enwrapped that not swathed in such or swathed in such glory could I see. He's enveloped in light. Love, which in stillness holds this heaven wrapped, such salutation here doth make alway, so is the candle for its flame made apt. In other words, Dante has to be made apt, made prepared, made ready to experience and endure what he will see. He says, as soon as I heard these words, within to me my sense became aware of mounting o'er such power as in thee lay. And a new sight so keen I kindled there. Line 58. No brilliancy unmasked that ever glowed had found mine eyes unequal to the glare. You've got a gloss there. It's like now, according to one interpretation, it's that now he sees as though his eyes are fully, finally transformed and redeemed and reunited with the glorified body. That's one interpretation. The other is, now he's seen as he ought to see. Light I beheld, top of page 320, which as a river flowed fulgid with splendor, and on either shore the colors of a wonder springtime showed. So he sees light flowing like a river. Book of Revelation, you've got God on the throne. In the river, the water of life flows from it. Back there in that passage in Daniel chapter 7, verses 9 and 10, the Ancient of Days enthrones himself, and you have the light flowing. And he says, and from the stream arose a glittering store of living sparks, like it's effervescing. And then Beatrice speaks to him and says, you got to drink of these waters. Why? Because the deep desire which in thee flames and leaps of tidings of the scene, thy fill to take the more delights me as it to mess it keeps. You've got to drink. Why? So that you can really understand what you're seeing. Before so great a thirst as thine, thou slake. Before your thirst can really be satisfied, you got to drink. Okay? So he drinks. And what happens? And as these eyelids, line 88, drinks with his eyes, not with his mouth. And as these eyelids drank unto their brim, beneath my gaze, the river's contours swayed, spreading and curving to a circle's rim, and it's now a vast sea of water. And he looks, and the gems and flowers which had been along the banks are now changed. And what's he see? He sees the celestial rose. Okay? Splendor of God, 97. Whereby these eyes beheld thy true realm's triumph, grant me power to say how that exalted triumph I beheld. God, give me the words to describe this. In yonder heaven, the lumen gloriae, the light of glory, reveals the Maker to created mind, which in his sight alone finds peace for I, for yes. Okay? And what's he see? 112. Mirrored in that light, tier upon tier, on myriad thrones rising on every side, those who from here returned, I gazed on there. And he describes them as petals. If in its inmost petals can reside so vast a light, in such a rose as this, what width immense must in the rim abide? Okay? So he keeps looking, because now he can see undeterred. For near and far no reckoning is due, line 121. Since nothing by the law of nature goes where God, no agent needs his will to do. Why does God not need any agents to do his will? Because God is there. So wherever you look in the celestial rose, God is at each point. What are all the people here? These are all the people Dante's met on his travels all the way through heaven. (124). Amid the gold of the eternal rose, whose gradual leaves unfolding, fragrantly extol that sun, Christ, which spring for aye bestows. Longing to speak, I followed silently in Beatrice's wake, and there she said, behold how great the white-robed company. White robes, why? Book of Revelation. To those who overcome, I will give you a white robe. Look on our city, see its gyres full spread. Behold our thrones, that are so nigh complete, few souls they lack for whom they're covenanted. Okay? That is, heaven's almost full. And one of the notes mentions that Dante may have thought the end of the world was near. Well, people have thought the end of the world was near ever since Christ said, I will come in glory, etc. I mean, they started thinking, will it be now? Notice he gives, a talk about that and says, don't ask when it's coming. So, 133. There where thou gazest on that mighty seat, as from the crown above thou mayst infer, ere at these nuptials thou be called to eat, the wedding feast of the Lamb, that is, before you're called to eat, before you die, shall sit the soul of that great Henry who will rise. And she's talking about the emperor, okay? And so you get the drawing of the celestial rose there. And you've got Mary at the top, and beneath Mary, Eve, because Mary is the second Eve. Mary is Eve as Eve ought to have been. And then Rachel, Sarah, Rebecca, Judith, Ruth, and then the Hebrew women. The yellow of the sempiternal rose, that's the sun, that's God at the center of the rose. And then opposite those holy women, you have the saintly men, John the Baptist, Francis, Benedictine, Augustine, etc., etc. Okay, and we're gonna see where to get the people named here. We're going to see each of them described. I mean, every one of them is going to have their place discussed. Okay, so Canto 31, and I know this is long. It's probably close to 3 hours. 327. Dante says, so now displayed before me as a rose of snow-white purity, the sacred might I saw, whom with his blood Christ made his spouse. This is the church triumphant that he sees. But the other, winging ever in his sight, chants praises to the glory it adores, its maker's good, extolling in delight. So Dante praises the trinal light, line 28 and following. praises and prays to. O trinal light, which shining as one star, it fills him with delight to gaze on there. Look down on us, storm-driven as we are. That's here on earth. You reign in peace up there. Look down on us means one thing. Look down with grace, favor, mercy. Talks about barbarians. 37. I, coming to holiness from the profane. Well, here he's in the presence of holiness. Profane, down on earth. We're specifically in the valley of the shadow of death, where he wandered in the dark wood. To the eternal, from the temporal, from Florence to a people just and sane. Notice that opposition. He's implying the people in Florence are unjust and insane. Into what stupor then must I needs fall? Truly twixt it and joy I then preferred no sound to hear, no word to speak at all. Okay? So he turns to look to Beatrice and discovers she's gone. Line 59. Not Beatrice, an elder there I saw, clad in the raiment of the saints in glory, all in white. A joyfulness benign his features wore, such gentle kindness his air implied. And Dante says, where is she? And he says, Beatrice sent me here for thy desires fulfillment. Why? Because Beatrice is not Dante's desires fulfillment. Lift up thine eyes, Old Testament, whence cometh thy help? Lift up thy eyes, yonder thy lady see, in the third circle from the highest place. If you go back to that chart, that diagram, on page 323, okay, you got Mary at the top, Eve, Rachel. Beatrice is sitting next to Rachel. She's sitting 2 seats down from Peter. And so Dante looks up and looks. He sees her. He sees the eternal rays reflecting from her. And Dante cries out, line 79, O thou in whom I hope securely dwell, and who to bring my soul to paradise didst leave the imprint of thy steps in hell. Because it was Beatrice who went down to limbo to get Virgil. Of all that I have looked on with these eyes, thy goodness and thy power have fitted me, that is, made me able, made me worthy, the holiness and grace to recognize. Thou hast led me, a slave of sin, to liberty, by every path and using every means which to fulfill this task were granted thee. That is, God granted you every means to raise me up here. Keep turned towards me thy munificence, that is, your generosity, your blessings, so that my soul, which thou hast remedied, you have made it healthy, may please thee when it quits the bonds of sense. Keep interceding for me when down here on earth, so that when I die, you will be pleased. Okay? And St. Bernard of Clairvaux, the founder of the Cistercian monks, says, line 94, thou mayst draw thy journey, so that thou mayst draw thy journey to a perfect close, like a circle, okay? And I, by prayer and holy love and sent, therefore, over this garden with thy vision fly, for looking on it will prepare thy gaze to rise towards God's luminance on high. That is, look at all the people in this rose. because looking at them will prepare you to look upwards to see God. The Queen of Heaven, with love of whom I blaze, since I, her faithful servant Bernard am, will grant us on our remission every grace. Mary will grant us the grace to do these things. Okay? And then Dante mentions or alludes to Saint Veronica and her veil. Saint Veronica, according to the story, when Christ stumbles carrying the cross and the woman leans forward and hands him a cloth and he wipes his face with it and gives it back to her, she is named by the church Veronica. Why? Veronica means true image. And there's a cloth in the Vatican that has an image of a face on it that it is believed by the faithful this was Saint Veronica's veil that she handed to Christ to wipe his face with. And when he wiped his face, he imprinted his face on it, kind of like the Shroud of Turin. There's the Shroud of Turin, which supposedly has the image of a crucified, well, it does have the image of a crucified man on it. Supposedly it's the image of Christ. There's also another thing called, it's either the napkin or the veil or the washcloth, something like that, of Oviedo, Spain. It's got an image of a man's face, okay? And it's got marks across the brow of thorn holes and drops of blood. One of the Gospels talks about, when Christ was buried and the disciples run in, they found the cloth that was wrapped around his head and then the cloth that was wrapped around his body, nicely folded and on the tomb. Anyways, 112, 109, St. Bernard says, so I there marveled, Dante, I there marveled at the living love of him who tasted while a mortal man by contemplation of that peace above. And that's because it was thought by some, not by all, that St. Bernard experienced, while alive, vision of God in his holiness. He saw God in his body, okay? In the Orthodox, the Eastern Church, that's not a big deal per se. We believe that what's called through the process of deification or theosis, people can attain to sainthood while alive on earth and can mystically, through prayer, enter heaven and see what's called the uncreated light of God. See God in his essence, can experience God in his essence, okay? So, he then addresses Dante, because Dante's looking at him. O son of grace, thou wilt not yonder joyous being know by fixing here beneath thy vision scan. Quit looking at me. St. Bernard is saying, look there. Look on the circles towards the utmost row. That is, fine, go up. Oh, see, there's Mary. Seest our enthroned queen, to whom all in this realm devotion owe? Dante says, and I looked. And so, mounting as from vale to mountain crest, these eyes beheld at the remotest rim a radiance surpassing all the rest. And he sees the Mother of God. 136. Were I endowed with wealth of words to say all I imagine, yet I dared not try the least part of their gladness to convey. Their gladness, the gladness of the saints. Bernard, who saw me gazing upon high towards the glowing focus of his love, his own eyes turned to her, Mary, so tenderly, still greater ardor fixed mine own above. Canto 32, page 334. So St. Bernard starts to identify the saints. He points out Eve sitting beneath Mary, Rachel, Ruth. I'm actually not going to point out all of these. Line 19, how the saints are divided. Since faith from two directions turned her gaze to Christ, these holy women from the wall, form the wall, which indicates the parting of the ways. That is a separation between the Old Testament, New Testament. With this section and forward. Within this section of the roads where all the petals are mature, these saints mark well. The faith in Christ to come, they heard the call. That is, everybody from the Old Testament forward, everybody from the Old Testament are adult. You got children from the New Testament and such, and they still appear as children and such. Okay. On yonder side, line 25, in semicircles dwell, parted by empty spaces here and there, those who believed in Christ Emmanuel, Christ in the flesh. So those on the other side believed in Christ to come, right? And he talks about Mary again there, and he says, facing Mary is the great John, that's John the Baptist. So across from the rows, so to speak, okay? Beneath him, Francis, Benedict, Augustine, line 35. And then stanzas that begin with lines 40 and 43 are talking about children and infants and babies, right? Babies, however, are only from the Old Testament period, because after Christ, they go to limbo if they're not baptized. That's why he says, well, it's stand 40. Know that to hear from where the petals meet up to midway, the lines of these partitions, no souls by their own merit have their seat, but by another's, that's Christ's, under fixed conditions. These are the fixed conditions. For all these spirits were absolved from sin ere they had reached control of their volitions, age of accountability. Okay? Lend ear and thou wilt realize how thin their voices are. They're still babies and children. Look well and thou wilt make out their infant faces and their childish demeanor, complexion, so to speak. Thomas Aquinas thought that when one died and went to heaven, one's heavenly body was like how one was in the height of one's youth. I don't know, prime of age, whatever that is. Dante obviously differs because there's little children there, okay? He goes on and says, now I know what you're thinking. You're wondering about, God's justice and little babies and stuff. So he says, what do I want to pick up? It's talking about how people get arranged in the heavenly rows. Not, line 73, not then by merit do these spirits grow to dwell at varying degrees of bliss. Grace given is the sight which grades them so. In mankind's earliest ages, true it is that innocent children came to paradise. Right? Before Abraham, how do I know before Abraham? The faith of parents being enough for this. Later, it was required to circumcise. So for boys, after this period, they had to be circumcised. Male infants at their innocent wings might gain the power to bear them upward to these skies. So there's a difference from the earliest to the period of Abraham, then from Abraham to the period of Christ. But since the Christian age, such things were vain. For then, without true baptism in Christ, such innocence in limbo must remain. So any baby born after the resurrection of Christ who dies without baptism, that child goes to limbo. forever. Think about that. So that's when he says, line 85. Now look at Mary. Now up to that face which most resembles Christ, lift up thy gaze. Its radiance alone can grant thee the power to look on Christ. So you got to look at Mary before you can look at Christ. You got to look at Mary first. Why? Well, this is part of, partially at least, how Dante is symbolically telling us, in order to get to Christ, you got to go through Mary. Why? Because in order to get Christ, God literally went through Mary, went into conception, out of birth. Okay? It's also, Mary is the primary interceder to Christ. I mean, who's going to be closer to Christ in terms of intercession than his own mother? Okay? So, line 94. So Dante begs Bernard, line 100 and following, the Holy Father who does bear for me to stay below, that is, who for my sake has left your place in the celestial rose to come and be with me, quitting thine own dear sight to which thou art destined in eternity. Which angel is it who in such delight looks in our angel's eyes with love so burning, that like a fire he seems so radiant bright? Okay. Thus I deferred once more to the discerning of one who Mary's loveliness arrayed, and Bernard replies, all joy and excellence that dwell in soul or angel in him is at its most sublime displayed, for this is he who brought the palm beloved. That is, it's Gabriel. Okay? So, Dante's looks around the celestial rose. He sees Adam, he sees Peter, he sees John, he sees Moses. He sees Anna, the mother of Mary. He sees St. Lucy, Santa Lucia, line 136, who Mary spoke to, who then spoke to Beatrice, who then went to Limbo to get Virgil. Okay? And Dante says, line 139, but since the time of my entrancement doth grow short, Bernard says, since the time of thy entrancement doth grow short, that is, your vision isn't going to last much longer. Not the vision, your experience here. Like the good tailor spoken of, we'll cut our coat according to our cloth. That is, got to get a move on. And here we'll stop to turn our eyes above. In other words, you've seen enough down here that thou, as far as may be, with thy gaze mayst penetrate into the primal love. It's time to look to God. All these others, as holy as they are designed to draw you forth to God. But lest perchance thy wings should seem to raise thee when thou downward fly, 'tis well for thee that prayer should first be offered for thy grace. Grace from Our Lady, who can ever be thy help in need. Now follow as anon I pray, so that thy heart stray not from me. Final canto. So we hear St. Bernard pray. And he prays to Mary, O Virgin Mother, daughter of thy Son, lowliest and loftiest of created nature, created stature. Why is she lowliest? Because she's humble. Look how she responds to the angelic announcement. Be it done unto me according to thy word. Why should, she asked, why should our God visit me? Okay? And loftiest, she's the most exalted. One of the hymns in the Orthodox Church says, more honorable than the cherubim, more honorable than the seraphim, more glorious beyond compare than the cherubim. Okay? Thou art she by whom our nature Human nature was so ennobled that it might become the creator to create himself his creature. That is, was so ennobled that it might become, it might be fit, might be meet and appropriate for the creator to create himself. Okay? Lady, skipping a bit, line 13. So great thou art, and such thy might, the seeker after grace, who shuns thy name, may aim his prayer, but fails to wing the flight. Not only does thy succor, thy comfort, flow out free to him who asks, but many a time the aid foreruns the prayer. That is, many times you send your grace to enable someone to pray. Such largesse is in thee. Line 19. All ruth, that's pity, all mercy are in thee displayed, and all munificence, generosity. In thee is knit together all that's good and all that's made. This man who witnessed from the deepest pit of all the universe up to this height, the soul's lives one by one doth now entreat, that thou, by grace, may grant to him such might that higher yet in vision he may rise towards the final source of bliss and light. And I, who never burned for my own eyes more than I burned for his, with all my prayers, I attach my prayers to him too. That all mortal clouding which impairs thine own prayers may possess the power to clean his sight. That is, any problem with his sight that has to do with his being mortal, that you would remove. And further do I pray thee, heavenly queen, who canst all that thou wilt, that is, who can perform all that you desire, keep his heart pure and meet when such great vision he has seen. Meet, fitting, appropriate. With thy protection, render him secure from human impulse. For this boon the saints with Beatrice, the thronging fold hands and implore. And we're told all of the souls in heaven kind of fold their hands together in prayer. Line 40. The eyes which God doth love and reverence. Love, God the Father. Reverence, God the Son, looking at his mother. Gazing on him who prayed, that is on St. Bernard, to us made plain how prayers devoutly prayed, her joy, Mary's joy enhance. Because unto the eternal light she raised them then. She looked up to God. No eye of living creature could aspire to penetrate so fixedly therein. And I, who now was drawing ever nigher towards the end of yearning as was due, quenched in my soul the burning of desire, Bernard conveyed to me what I should do by sign and smile. Already on my own I had looked upwards. That is, before he gotten the sign from St. Bernard, Dante had already looked upwards. Why? Well, what did St. Bernard say in his prayer? That sometimes Mary, before the prayer is even made, bestows that grace to enable the prayer. I think that's what's happened here. She's already bestowed the grace to Dante so that he's already drawn up. For now my sight clear and yet clearer grown, pierced through the ray of that exalted light, wherein as in itself the truth is known. Why as in itself? Because I am the way, the truth, and the life. Henceforth my vision mounted to a height where speech is vanquished and must lag behind, and memory surrenders. So what does he say? 61. So of my vision, now, when he's writing it down, but little part remains. Now, vision there can refer to the ability to see that he was given, his improved vision, down here, back in earth, in my earthly body, Yeah, I don't see so well anymore. I don't see like I did then. Can have that meaning. Or it can mean the vision that I saw, but little part remains. Yet in my inmost soul, I know the sweet instilling which it did impart. This grace that brings him peace and that overflows him. So, O light supreme, he's invoking God, he's praying to God. By mortal thought unscanned, grant that thy former aspect may return. Aspect, appearance, face. Once more, a little of thyself relend. Give me just a little inkling of that image. Make strong my tongue, that in its words may burn one single spark of all thy glory's light for future generations to discern. Help me to get just a speck right, so that they can discern through my speck the light that is there to be enjoyed. For if my line 73. For if my memory but glimpse the sight, whereof these lines would now a little say. These lines, I could only express so little of it. And if I could just get a glimpse of that sight to be able to put it in memory, put it down in words. Men may the better estimate thy might, thy answer to prayer, thy grace, the piercing brightness of the living ray, which I endured. Notice he's using all past tense now to describe the vision. My vision had undone, I think, if I had turned my eyes away. And I recall this further led me on. So I'm piercing together the memories. Wherefore my gaze more boldness yet assumed till the infinite good at last had won. I looked and looked and looked and looked. O grace abounding. We'll finish the line. O grace abounding to chief of, it's St. Paul. And what Dante is doing there is he's saying, I am the chief of sinners. O grace abounding whereby I presumed so deep the eternal light to search and sound that my whole vision was therein consumed. But what does consume mean? Eaten up, destroyed, burned, annihilated. In that abyss, I saw how love held bound into one volume all the leaves whose flight is scattered to the universe around. All of creation is bound in God. How substance, accident, and mode unite, fused, so to speak, together. In other words, all of these philosophical principles are all in this one simple light. Yea, of this complex, I believe mine eyes beheld the universal form. Here we are, back in Plato, back in Boethius. In me, even as I speak. That is now, relating it later after the journey. Well, I feel such joy arise. Okay? So he says, and so my mind, bedazzled and amazed, stood fixed in wonder, motionless intent. Why motionless? Because he's in the very presence of God itself, himself. All motion ceases. Intent and still my wonder kindled. It's inflamed, it grows. That light doth so transform a man's whole bent that never to another side or thought would he surrender with his consent. What's he mean? Once you see this, you never want to see anything else. That's why when I talked earlier about that, that vision of heaven as being, great family reunion kind of thing, I don't think that's right. Not if you take, at least what Dante is describing here as the exemplar, or the end of the book of Revelation, the image there, or the passage in Daniel. I mean, what's the image? Once you see the, so to speak, reality of God, nothing else matters. For everything the will has ever sought is gathered there. And there is every quest made perfect, which apart from it falls short. Now, back down on earth, even what I recall will be expressed more feebly than if I could wield no more than a babe's tongue. In other words, what I will express now will be like babbling. Not that the living light I looked on wore more semblances than one, which cannot be. Why? Because, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is God is one. The Shema of Israel from, what is it, Deuteronomy 6:9, something like that. For it is always what it was before. But as my sight by seeing learned to see the transformation which in me took place, transformed the single changeless form for me. Notice what's transformed. It's Dante's mind. That light supreme within its fathomless clear substance showed to me 3 spheres, which bear 3 hues distinct and occupied 1 space. Not like, a circle, a sphere, a sphere, a sphere, kind of like, the Olympic circles, but with 3 instead of 5. It's the three spheres taking up 1 space and yet being 3. The first mirrored the next as though it were rainbow from rainbow. And the third seemed flame breathed equally from each of the first pair. That's the filioque that I talked about in the previous lecture, in the creed that gets added to the creed, the Nicene Constantinopolitan creed of 325 and 381, I think it is, where the phrase "and the Son" gets attached, so that in the Western Church, the creed reads that the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son, whereas in the Eastern Church, the "and the Son" was never added, right? So this is Dante kind of showing his Catholic bona fides, his good faith there. How weak are words, how unfit to frame my concept. He's kind of like, I'm struggling here. How do I describe this? Eternal light that in thyself alone dwelling, alone dost know thyself, and smile on thyself, love, so knowing and so known. It's the 3 persons of the Trinity loving each other. The sphering thus begot perceptible in thee like mirrored light. And now he realizes that second sphere that rainbowed the first, the more he looks at it, when I had looked on it a little while, that is, when he focuses on it, what? Seemed in itself and in its own self-hue, limbed with our image. It's like it takes on human shape, for which cause mine eyes were altogether drawn and held thereto. Seen. Well, traditional Christian theology is that when Christ ascended, he ascended in the flesh. And the Orthodox make a big deal of this. He took human flesh to the Godhead. He is always now in that shape. He is never fleshless. So this, We Orthodox would have a problem with this because he can't be depicted as a sphere. He's always this. So strove I with that wonder. 136. How to fit the image to the spheres. How does this work? So sought to see how it maintained the point of rest in it. Thither my own wings, intellect, could not carry me, but that a flash my understanding. In other words, he has a light bulb moment, meaning he understands how the angels understand. Instinctively, intuitively, immediately. Whence its desire came to it suddenly has its desire fulfilled. He now knows. High fantasy lost power and here broke off. Yet as the wheel moved swiftly, free from jars, my will and my desire were turned by love. They were turned, they were met by love. The love that moves the sun and the other stars, God. And notice, that's it. Why don't we get and I went back home and I wrote it all down, and I'm saying this so that you can believe in Jesus, you know. Why doesn't he do that? Because that's not the focus. The focus is that journey. As Sarah says in her first introduction, you know, the whole journey occurs interiorly. Okay, it's described as a physical journey, but it also all has to occur where? Inside, in each individual who reads it. Dante's writing this for, I don't know that I'd say proselytizing purposes. He's writing it for spiritual edification purposes. Okay. He's also writing it to delight. I mean, there's no doubt about that. He wants people to go, wow, what a great writer. He also wants people to go, wow, that was pretty deep. I should think about that. I mean, if that's really what it's like. He also wants people, I think, to kind of go, did that really happen? I mean, that's pretty detailed for it not to really happen. Okay, I'll leave you to answer those questions, and thank you for the class. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed talking about these books, and I will talk to you later.